The woman my brother planned to marry. Cornered me in my own home and promised to teach me my place. She thought. Marrying William would make her mistress of the Sanders family. No one had told her that my brother was adopted. I was the Sanders family's only heir. I had just returned from years abroad, and my parents were waiting eagerly. When William brought me home from the airport, in the middle of our reunion, he pulled a woman forward. "This is Chloe," he said, suddenly shy. "My girlfriend, your future sister-in-law." Chloe clasped my hands and greeted me with a perfect smile. She was soft-spoken, graceful and attentive. In front of my parents that night, Mom explained that Chloe had started as an intern at the branch. William managed. He hadn't dated long before he announced that he wanted to marry her. My parents would have preferred someone from a similar family, but they loved William enough to accept the woman he chose. I was happy for him. Then I met the real Chloe. Jet lag kept me asleep until afternoon. I went downstairs for breakfast and heard her behind me. "You're only waking up now. William has already been working for half the day." I turned around. "Were you speaking to me?" She descended the staircase with folded arms and a look that belonged on the owner of the house. "Who else is here? We barely know each other," I said, "so don't lecture me and don't call me your sister." Yet the front door opened. Chloe transformed instantly. Her shoulders drooped, her eyes shone with tears, and her voice became fragile. "Please don't be angry. If you don't want me to call you sister, I won't." William and Mom walked in to find her blinking back tears. "What happened?" William asked. "Nothing," Chloe whispered. "I thought calling Molly my sister would make us close. I didn't know it would upset her. My mother told me it was a tiny misunderstanding." William blamed my temper on jet lag and led Chloe upstairs, as if rescuing her from me. I was too astonished to defend myself. A few days later, my childhood friend Brian asked how I liked my future sister-in-law. The expression on his face told me he knew something. "Chloe entered your company with one goal," he said, "William. Now she tells everyone she's already the Sanders daughter-in-law." He showed me screenshots from a chat with her friends. Brian had obtained them through someone in Chloe's social circle. I did not ask for details. He never volunteered them without enjoying the mystery. What mattered was that the language matched the woman I had met. When no one else was present, "William Sanders is already in my pocket. His family's house is enormous. I have to hold on to this opportunity. His sister is coming home soon. Sisters-in-law are always trouble. I'll teach her her place before she becomes a threat." I sent the screenshots to myself, but said nothing at home. If I accused Chloe immediately, William would claim I disliked her without cause. So I watched. Her sweetness was selective. At breakfast, she remembered Dad's preferred coffee and asked Mom about her latest charity project. The moment they left the room, she dropped the smile and asked why I was still staying in their house after living abroad for so long. When Mrs. Wilson entered, Chloe changed the subject so smoothly that I almost admired the skill. She charmed my parents, praised everything my mother wore, and received designer gifts. In return, she flattered William until he converted her internship into a permanent position and promoted her into an easy department role. What began as occasional overnight stays became a permanent place in our house. At work, her new title gave her status without responsibility. She let others finish assignments, then appeared when results were presented. William interpreted every complaint as jealousy from employees who resented his girlfriend's talent. She smiled at everyone except me and our longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Wilson. At the branch office, she used William, his name, to skip approvals and assign her unfinished work to junior employees. No one complained openly. They believed the future Mrs. Sanders could decide promotions and dismissals with a whisper. Each small abuse reinforced the power she imagined she already possessed. One night, Mrs. Wilson brought me soup she had simmered for hours. Chloe demanded a bowl, too. When she learned there was none left, and Mrs. Wilson was preparing for bed, she planted her hands on her hips. "Are you the Sanders housekeeper or a pampered lady? If I ask for soup, you make it?" Mrs. Wilson went back to the kitchen. The following morning, Chloe served my mother tea and asked whether Mrs. Wilson had seemed tired lately. At the end of the conversation, she had made herself sound considerate and the housekeeper sound lazy. I tried warning William. "Do you actually know the person you're marrying?" He laughed and treated me like a jealous child. "Chloe loved him," he said, "and he expected me to respect his future wife." When I asked how much he knew about her life before the internship, he became defensive. Chloe had told him that wealthy families always investigated poor women, and that any questions would prove we looked down on her. She had turned ordinary caution into cruelty before we ever exercised it. Then she set her sights on my bedroom. "Your room has the best light," she said, while William stood nearby. "We marry. Can we move into it? You'll leave after your own wedding someday. It would be a shame for such a beautiful room to sit empty." Her tone wasn't a request. It was notice. I looked at William. He said nothing. "You haven't married into this family," I said, "and you're already dividing my belongings. If William wants a marital home, he can buy one. Why are you planning to occupy mine?" Mom heard the last sentence and hurried over. Molly apologized. Chloe lowered her eyes, concealing a triumphant smile. "It's all right. Auntie Molly is upset. William and I don't need to move out. We can live here and care for you when you're old." One flattering sentence erased what she had actually said. William joined in. "She was teasing you. Why take a joke so seriously?" My mother praised Chloe for being understanding and scolded me for being petty. That was her favorite trick. She provoked me in private, then performed innocence before an audience. Every time I reacted, I became the villain in a story she had written. Meanwhile, wedding plans moved forward. I began to panic, not because I feared losing my room or my inheritance, but because my parents and brother were inviting a calculating stranger into the center of our family. I waited until Chloe was away and called a family meeting. "I don't agree to this marriage." Mom sighed before I could explain. "Molly, don't start trouble." William looked almost satisfied.
"Chloe predicted this," she said.
"You would try to stop us."
Of course she had.
He had inoculated him against the truth before I ever spoke it. "Why do you hate her so much?" he demanded. "She has tried to win you over and you reject everything she does. If you can't stand living with us, we'll move out after the wedding. Will that finally make you happy?" Dad remained silent, watching me with disappointment. Mom told me love mattered more than background, and that I needed to give Chloe a chance. They believed I was protecting my status. None of them understood that Chloe didn't even know what my status was. To her, William was the wealthy heir, and I was an unmarried sister who would eventually be sent away. That misconception explained her obsession with my bedroom, and her eagerness to establish authority over the staff. She wasn't merely marrying a man. She believed she was acquiring a household. William had never discussed the structure of our family with her. My parents raised him as their son, and I loved him as my brother. But legally, the Sanders Trust holding shares in estate would pass only to me. His position at the branch existed because my parents gave it to him. Chloe had mistaken access for ownership. That distinction did not make William less my brother. It did mean that Chloe's entire plan depended on a future that legally did not exist. He was threatening the sole heir, while believing she was removing a disposable sister. I could have ended the argument by telling her that. Instead, I gave William one final chance. "If I show you proof that she targeted you for money, will you still marry her?" His face hardened. "There is no proof." That wasn't my question.
"Chloe loves me."
"I know her better than you do."
Mom nodded. "Enough."
"Molly, you just came home, and you are already tearing the family apart." Reached into my bag and placed my phone on the table. "You say there is no proof,"
I said.
"Then read what Chloe tells her friends when none of you are listening." The first screenshot filled the screen. "William Sanders is already in my pocket." I turned the phone toward my brother. Beneath that line waited the message, where his future wife described exactly how she planned to put me in my place. "Go ahead, William," I said. "Tell me again that you know her better than I do." The room descended into a suffocating quiet. The low hum of the grandfather clock in the foyer seemed to tick louder with every passing second, counting down the remnants of my brother's fragile composure. William stared down at the screen, his pupils darting left and right. Across the lines of text, "William Sanders is already in my pocket. His family's house is enormous. I have to hold on to this opportunity. His sister is coming home soon. Sisters-in-law are always trouble. I'll teach her her place before she becomes a threat." For 3 full seconds, the color drained from his face until his skin matched the bleached linen of the dining cloth. But then, as psychological defense mechanisms so often do, his disbelief mutated into hostility. He shoved the phone away with the back of his hand, sending it skidding across the polished mahogany until it struck my teacup with a sharp clink. "Anyone can fake a chat log, Molly," William said, his voice trembling slightly, before finding an edge of defensive fury. "You've been out of the country for years. You don't know who her friends are. You don't know what kind of bitter people she had to cut out of her life when we started dating. Someone is jealous of her, and you're letting them feed you garbage." My mother let out a long, shuddering exhale, eager to seize William's explanation. "Molly, darling, William is right. The internet is full of malicious software nowadays. People forge text threads to extort money.
Chloe.
Has been nothing but gentle to us. Why would she write something so venomous? My father, who had remained quiet with his hands clasped over his cane, leaned forward. He didn't dismiss the phone immediately. His eyes studied the screen, taking in the timestamp and the casual cruelty in the phrasing. But years of wanting William to feel secure in our family weighed on his judgment. Molly, my father said quietly, if these are real, it's unacceptable. But unverified digital excerpt isn't enough to blow an entire engagement apart. Where did you get this? From someone who moves in the exact social circle she boasts to, I replied, evenly, refusing to raise my voice. Brian vetted the origin.
She didn't send
This to an enemy. She sent it to a group chat she thought was private. Look at
the date.
She sent that the afternoon before I landed. Brian. William scoffed, his face flushing red. Brian has looked down on me since we were children. He's your friend, not mine. He'd do anything to back you up. The bitterness in his voice stung, exposing an old, raw insecurity William had carried his entire life. Because he was adopted, every disagreement, every perceived slight, translated in his mind into a conspiracy of bloodline versus outsider. Chloe had sniffed out that wound with surgical precision and poured
Poison directly into it.
This isn't about blood, William, I said softly. This is about someone using your vulnerability to dismantle this family. Before he could shout back, the front door swung open. The chime of the brass handle broke the tension. Chloe walked into the foyer, carrying 2 boutique pastry boxes tied with pastel ribbons. She wore an ivory cashmere sweater, a gift my mother had bought her only last week, and her hair fell in loose, demure waves. Good evening, everyone, she sang out, her voice light, innocent, and bright. The bakery on 4th finally had the almond tarts Mom mentioned. I had to wait 40 minutes, but I knew you'd love them. She paused mid-stride as she entered the dining room. Her gaze swept over the table. The silence, my cold posture, the phone lying face up between our cups, and the tense, flushed anger on William's face.
For
less than half a second, her smile flickered. Her eyes narrowed into tiny slits of cold calculation before the mask slipped back on. Did I interrupt something? She asked, her voice instantly dropping into that fragile, hesitant register she used to manipulate my mother. William stood up immediately, walking over to her and taking the pastry boxes from her hands.
No.
You didn't. William, my father warned, his tone firm. Sit down, both of you. Chloe looked at my father, then at my mother, her bottom lip quivering slightly. Auntie Eleanor, what's happening? Did I do something wrong? Chloe, dear, my mother began, clearly uncomfortable. Molly received some screenshots, messages allegedly from your account. Chloe didn't rush to defend herself with anger. Instead, she let out a small, stunned gasp. She walked toward the table, her eyes widening as she looked at the phone screen. Then, slowly, she covered her mouth with both hands and genuine tears welled up in her eyes. It was an Oscar-caliber performance. This, her voice broke. This is horrible. Who would write this? Under my name? You did, I said calmly. Chloe turned to me, her eyes brimming with hurt. Molly, I know you think I'm not good enough for William. I know I come from an ordinary family and you've lived abroad, attending prestigious academies. But to fabricate something so ugly to make it look like I'm some kind of monster who wants to hurt you. She turned to William, gripping his forearm. William, you know me.
You know how
hard I've worked. I cried for days when my college roommate stole my portfolio.
And blocked me.
This is her group. She's been trying to ruin my life ever since she found out we were together. William wrapped his arm around her shoulders, glaring at me with unfiltered hostility. Are you satisfied now, Molly? You brought a bitter stranger's slander into our house and made Chloe cry.
She's lying, William, I said.
Enough, William barked. I am marrying her.
If you can't accept that, then
maybe you shouldn't have come back. The room fell dead silent. My mother gasped. William, don't speak to your sister like that. Then tell her to stop treating my fiancé like a criminal. William shouted, pulling Chloe closer to his side. I'm taking Chloe upstairs. We won't stay down here to be interrogated. He led her out of the room. As Chloe climbed the stairs, she turned her head back just far enough that William couldn't see, catching my eye in the dining room mirror.
Her tears were gone.
Her lips curved into a sharp, victorious smirk, her eyes glinting with pure
contempt.
"You lost," her expression said. "And you can't touch me." I picked up my phone, wiped a drop of spilled tea from the glass screen, and looked at my father. He looked exhausted, rubbing his temples with an unsteady
Hand.
"Molly," he sighed. "Family harmony requires patience." "Patience doesn't cure cancer, Dad," I said, rising from the table. "It only gives it time to spread." Over the next 2 weeks, Chloe moved with accelerated boldness. Having survived the screenshot confrontation, she concluded that William's devotion was absolute, and my parents were too polite to challenge her. She began behaving not as an engaged guest, but as the de facto lady of the Sanders estate. One afternoon, I came home from a meeting in the city to find two strange men in blue overalls hauling antique rosewood armchairs out of the third-floor library, adjacent to my bedroom. "Stop right there," I called out. "What are you doing?" The movers looked bewildered. Before they could speak, Chloe stepped out of my bedroom, a clipboard in hand. "Oh, Molly, you're back early," she said casually, checking off an item on her
List.
"William and I decided that your room will be our master suite after the wedding. It has the best natural light, and the connecting dressing room is much larger. I'm having the adjoining study converted into my personal walk-in closet." I walked up the stairs, my steps steady and unhurried. "Who authorized you to enter my room or touch these furnishings?" "William did," she said, her voice dropping into that smug, low frequency she reserved only for me. "He is the executive director of the branch, Molly. He is the man who carries the Sanders name in the business community. You're an unmarried daughter who's going to marry out anyway. Why should you hoard the
Premier suite.
She stepped closer, leaning in so the movers couldn't hear. "Your little screenshot stunt was cute. But did you see how fast he defended me? He belongs
To me.
This house belongs to him, which means very soon you'll be the guest. Here. If you play nice, I might let you stay in the West Wing attic when you visit." I looked at her, noting the arrogance dancing in her pupils. She had completely bought into her own fantasy. "You truly believe William owns everything, don't you?" I asked quietly. Chloe gave a cold, breathy laugh. "He's the only son. The entire city knows the Sanders group will be passed down to him. Who else would it go to? You?"
She
tapped her chin mockingly. "Don't make me laugh. Now be a good girl and tell Mrs. Wilson to pack your vanity. I want painters in here by Friday." "Put the chairs back," I told the movers, ignoring her. "Hey," Chloe snapped, her voice sharpening. "I hired you. Move them down to the basement." "I am Molly Sanders," I said, turning my eyes upon the two workmen. My voice carried the cold authority of someone who had trained under corporate litigators in London for 4 years. "This property is deeded solely under the Sanders Heritage Trust. If you move a single piece of furniture outside that door, I will have the police here in 10 minutes, charging your company with grand larceny and unlawful entry." The two men exchanged terrified looks, instantly set the rosewood chairs down, apologized profusely, and hurried down the stairs before Chloe could even scream at them. Chloe's face burned scarlet. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Just wait until William comes home tonight. I'll make sure he throws you out himself." "I welcome him to try," I replied, stepping past her into my room and shutting the heavy oak door in her face. That evening, I didn't wait for Chloe's manufactured tears to trigger another domestic screaming match. I met Brian at a quiet private club downtown. Brian slid a thick manila folder across the dark wood table. "You were right to dig deeper," Brian said, taking a sip of his bourbon. "Chloe Vance isn't just an opportunist. She's a professional parasite with a trail of wreckage behind her." I opened the folder. Inside were tax filings, background checks, bank statements, and court records. "Her real name is Chloe Vane," Brian explained. "She changed the spelling legally 2 years ago after a scandal at a mid-sized logistics firm in Chicago. She was the personal assistant to the CEO's son. Within 8 months, she convinced him to give her access to discretionary expense accounts, racked up $200,000 in luxury purchases, and funneled kickbacks through a bogus PR vendor. When the CEO found out, he threatened to press charges, but the son was so humiliated he paid off the company losses out of his trust fund, just to sweep it under the rug. Chloe walked away with nearly $80,000 in cash. I flipped through the bank records. "And what has she been doing at Williams' branch?" Brian leaned forward, his smile turning sharp. "That's where it gets interesting. William has been blinding himself to her work. She hasn't just been skipping assignments, Molly. Over the last 4 months, she created a shell vendor called Lumina Creative Concepts for corporate event staging. She's signed 3 separate contracts totaling $420,000 using William's automated approval signature on the internal portal. Did William know? I asked, a cold knot tightening in my chest.
No.
William is careless with his login credentials because he trusts her. Implicitly, she's been approving purchase orders from her own laptop while sitting on his couch. The staging company has no employees and no physical office, just a P.O. box and an offshore account registered under her cousin's name. I stared at the paper trail. This was no longer just petty family manipulation. This was corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and criminal conspiracy. There's more, Brian added. She's pushing William to announce their formal engagement at the annual Founders Gala next Saturday at the Grand Imperial Ballroom. She's already invited dozens of local journalists, fashion influencers, and corporate partners. She wants the engagement publicized across every financial and society page in the state. Once it's public, she thinks your parents won't dare cut William off for fear of a PR disaster. I closed the folder, the crisp paper snapping shut in the quiet room. She thinks public spectacle is her shield, I said softly. What's your move? Brian asked, watching me with keen amusement. Do we take this to the police tomorrow? No, I replied, feeling a cold, deliberate clarity settle into my veins. If we arrest her tomorrow, William will convince himself she was framed.
He'll drain
his personal savings to hire her defense lawyers and spend the next 10 years resenting this family. For William to be saved from his own blindness, the illusion has to shatter in broad daylight, in front of the very audience she assembled. The following week, I maintained absolute silence at home. When William came down to breakfast with a sullen, defiant expression, I greeted him politely. When Chloe openly wore a 4-carat diamond ring that William had bought on credit, I offered a calm nod. When she subtly reminded Mrs. Wilson that staff who can't keep up with modern standards will be replaced after the wedding, I quietly told Mrs. Wilson to take a paid 4-day vacation at a luxury spa resort until Sunday. Chloe mistook my silence for surrender. She strutted through the house like an empress who had secured her throne. She spent William's money on haute couture gowns, booked VIP beauty teams, and made daily posts on social media flaunting the Sanders estate gardens with captions like, "Building my forever empire with my love." My parents, relieved that the open fighting had stopped, allowed themselves to be swept into the wedding preparations. My mother accompanied Chloe to floral tastings while my father prepared his speech for the annual Founders Gala. On Friday afternoon, the day before the gala, I walked into the Sanders Group corporate headquarters in the city's financial center. I didn't visit the branch office where William worked. I went directly to the 40th floor, straight into the office of Mr. Arthur Vance, the family's senior legal counsel and trustee of the Sanders Heritage Trust for over 30
years.
Mr. Vance stood up, adjusting his silver-rimmed glasses as I entered.
Molly.
It's been too long. Your father told me you were back from Europe. Hello, Uncle Arthur, I said, sitting down across from him. I'm here to review the trust instruments regarding the corporate succession and the upcoming annual disclosures. Arthur Vance nodded gravely. He pulled a thick leather-bound binder from his safe. Your father set this up 20 years ago, Molly, Arthur explained. The terms
have never changed.
The Sanders Heritage Trust holds 74% of the voting equity of the Sanders Group and the deed to all real estate properties, including the manor. The sole designated beneficiary and successor trustee is you, the biological heir. William was granted a lifetime executive salary and a 5% non-voting dividend yield from the secondary logistics subsidiary, on the condition of continued employment in good standing. Arthur looked at me over his glasses. William has zero legal authority to pledge company assets, transfer real estate, or assign board seats. If he ceases to be employed or acts against the material interest of the parent company, even his secondary dividend can be revoked by the primary trustee. And who holds the primary trustee signature as of my 25th birthday?
I asked.
Arthur smiled faintly, sliding the signing ledger and the corporate seal across
the desk.
You do, Molly. Since last month. I looked down at the documents that held the true power of our family. Chloe had spent months maneuvering, scheming, and bullying people, convinced she was conquering a kingdom by seducing its crown prince. She had no idea she was seducing a salaried manager who didn't own the chair he sat on. Uncle Arthur, I said quietly, prepare the formal disclosure declarations for tomorrow night's gala, and bring the head of corporate internal audits with
You.
the Grand Imperial Ballroom was bathed in crystal light and amber champagne on Saturday evening. More than 400 guests filled the hall, business tycoons, city officials, prominent investors, and high society families. Giant floral arches of white orchids lined the perimeter, an extravagant request Chloe had billed directly to the corporate hospitality account. Chloe looked radiant, wearing a custom off-the-shoulder emerald gown that shimmered under the chandeliers. She stood beside William at the entrance, greeting every prominent guest with the practiced grace of a queen welcoming her
Subjects.
Mr. Sterling, so wonderful of you to come. Chloe beamed, shaking hands with a major logistics partner. William and I are so excited to expand the group's regional partnerships next quarter. Once we finalize the merger, our family will be hosting a private dinner at the manor. The partner smiled politely, nodding at William. Congratulations, William. You've found yourself an ambitious partner. William beamed with pride. He looked at Chloe with absolute adoration, entirely blind to the fact that she was dropping company commitments she had no right to make. I arrived at 8 o'clock, wearing a tailored navy silk evening gown, accompanied by Brian and Mr. Arthur Vance. We slipped into the hall quietly, taking a table near the side mezzanine. Chloe spotted me immediately. Her lips curved into a smug, condescending smile. She whispered something to William, took 2 glasses of vintage champagne from a passing waiter, and glided over to our table. Molly, Chloe purred, handing 1 glass toward me with mock sweetness. I'm so glad you decided to come out of your room. I know it must be difficult for you, seeing your brother take center stage while your life remains unsettled.
But
Don't worry. Once William and I are married, we'll make sure to introduce you to some respectable middle management bachelors. Brian let out a low chuckle into his champagne glass. I didn't take the glass she offered. I simply looked at her, noting the heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone, an heirloom piece she had coaxed my mother into lending her for the night. Enjoy your champagne, Chloe, I said evenly. It's very expensive. Chloe scoffed, tossing her hair over her shoulder. Everything in this room belongs to the Sanders family, Molly, which means it belongs to William.
and
What belongs to William is mine. You can glare at me all night, but in 30 minutes, William will announce our engagement on that stage, and your father will announce the corporate handover. You've lost. Accept it. She turned on her heel and glided back toward the stage, where William was already adjusting his microphone. My father and mother stood near the foot of the stage. My father looked uneasy. The sudden scale of this engagement announcement had clearly gotten out of hand, but Chloe had framed it as a strategic brand showcase to boost company morale. The master of ceremonies tapped his glass, and the room grew quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed partners and dear friends, the MC announced. Please welcome Mr. William Sanders and his fiancée, Miss Chloe Vance. The room erupted into polite applause. William and Chloe walked up the stairs, hand in hand, stepping into the warm spotlight. Chloe held her chin high, her eyes sparkling as several society photographers snapped flashes from the front
row.
William stepped to the podium, his voice brimming with emotion. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight, William began. Tonight marks a milestone not only for the Sanders Group, but for my personal life. Over the past year, I have found a woman who stands by me, inspires me, and shares my vision for the future of our family's enterprise. Chloe has been my greatest pillar of strength. Chloe dabbed at a manufactured tear at the corner of her eye, looking out at the crowd with practiced vulnerability. And tonight, William continued, glancing down at my parents, as my father prepares to step back from executive duties, Chloe and I are ready to take on the responsibility of carrying this legacy forward into the next generation. I'm afraid that won't be possible, William. The voice was clear, resonant, and amplified through the ballroom's secondary audio system. The entire ballroom went dead silent. I stood up from my seat at the mezzanine, holding a wireless microphone, and walked slowly toward the center aisle between the rows of tables. Brian and Arthur Vance walked 2 paces behind me, followed by 2 uniformed officers from the Financial Crimes Unit and the Chief Auditor of the Sanders Group. William froze at the podium. Molly, what are you doing? Sit down. Chloe's expression twisted into instant rage. She grabbed the podium microphone. Molly, if you have personal jealousy toward our relationship, take it outside. This is a formal corporate gala. Have some shame. A murmur ran through the crowd of 400 high society guests. Several photographers immediately swung their long lenses from the stage toward me. I stopped at the foot of the stage, looking up at Chloe and William. I am not here as your sister, William, I said, my voice steady, carrying, without a tremor across every corner of the vast hall. I am here as the sole successor trustee and primary shareholder of the Sanders Heritage Trust. A collective gasp rippled through the older corporate executives in the front
row.
They knew the name of the trust. They had signed contracts with it for
Decades.
Chloe let out a sharp, mocking laugh into her microphone. What nonsense are you babbling about? Everyone knows William is the heir. William, tell security to remove her. William doesn't have the authority to remove anyone from this building, Chloe, I said calmly. I turned slightly toward Arthur Vance, who stepped forward and opened his leather folio under the bright lights of the stage. As legal counsel for the Sanders Group for 32 years, Arthur Vance spoke into a microphone with booming authority. I hereby confirm that all voting equity, corporate real estate, intellectual property, and estate assets are held exclusively under the Sanders Heritage Trust. Under the legal framework established at its inception, Mr. William Sanders is a non-equity beneficiary, holding zero ownership shares and no succession rights to the primary corporation. The words hit the stage like a detonation. Chloe's triumphant smile froze instantly. The color vanished from her face so fast she looked like a marble statue. Her fingers gripped the podium until her knuckles turned chalk white. What did you say? Chloe stammered, her voice shaking violently over the speakers. That's impossible. William is the son. He's the eldest son. William is my adopted brother, I stated plainly, looking directly into the crowd, then up at William. My parents raised him with boundless love, gave him their name, and granted him executive status. But the Sanders Empire was founded by my grandfather for his biological bloodline, the sole legal owner of this company, this building, the manor you tried to redecorate, and the very ground you stand on tonight is me. The ballroom exploded into frantic whispers and gasps. Society women covered their mouths. Corporate partners leaned in to confer in hurried tones. William stood paralyzed, his jaw slack, staring at me as if the universe had just inverted itself. Molly, what is this? Why are you doing this here? Because your fiancé didn't want a quiet family conversation, I replied.
She
wanted a public spectacle. So I'm giving her one. I signaled to the projection booth. The giant multimedia screens behind the stage, originally set up to play a romantic montage of William and Chloe's relationship, flickered. Instantly, the screens displayed high-resolution bank transfer receipts, corporate audit sheets, and contract signatures. Over the last 4 months, I announced, Miss Chloe Vance, formerly Chloe Vane, has utilized unauthorized access to executive credentials to embezzle $420,000 through a fictitious shell entity named Lumina Creative Concepts.
She
has forged approval signatures, laundered corporate funds into offshore accounts, and used company credit lines to finance luxury personal expenditures. The screen shifted, displaying Chloe's previous sealed settlement from Chicago, alongside full-screen screenshots of her private text messages. William Sanders is already in my pocket. I'll teach her place before she becomes a threat. Once I lock down the marriage, the old couple and the sister won't have a say in anything. The evidence was undeniable, clinical, and complete. The ballroom fell into a stunned, horrified silence. The flashing cameras were relentless now, capturing every agonizing micro-expression of Chloe's humiliation. Chloe looked at the screens, then at the hundreds of influential people staring at her in disgust. Her carefully constructed facade of sweetness and sophistication collapsed entirely. She whirled around on William, grabbing his tuxedo lapels, her voice screeching through the open mic. Is this true? You don't own the company. You have no shares? You're just an adopted nobody living on an allowance. William stared at her, his eyes wide with shattered heartbreak. Chloe, what are you saying? You said you loved me. You said none of the money mattered. Loved you. Chloe screamed, completely unhinged, her voice echoing grotesquely through the ballroom speakers. You think I would spend 8 months catering to your pathetic insecurities, listening to your boring business ideas and smiling at your nagging mother for a salaried branch manager? You told me you were taking over the empire. You let me believe you were the heir. She pushed him away with such violent revulsion that William stumbled back against the podium, knocking over a floral arrangement of white orchids. "You lied to me," Chloe shrieked, tears of sheer narcissistic rage streaming down her ruined makeup. "You're a fraud. You're nothing. The only fraud in this room is you, Miss Vane." A calm voice cut through the chaos. The two financial crimes unit officers walked up the stage stairs, followed by building security. The senior investigator pulled out his badge and a pair of steel handcuffs. "Chloe Vane, you are under arrest for grand larceny, corporate wire fraud, and
Forgery.
you have the right to remain silent." As the cold steel snapped around her wrists, Chloe began kicking and screaming, thrashing against the officers. "Get your hands off me. William, do something. Eleanor, tell them I'm wearing your necklace. You can't arrest me in front of everyone." Mrs. Wilson, who had quietly arrived with my mother from the side entrance, stepped forward calmly. "With steady hands, Mrs. Wilson unclasped the 4-carat heirloom diamond necklace from Chloe's throat and placed it into a velvet pouch. "You are not worthy to wear the Sanders family jewels," Mrs. Wilson said softly. Chloe was dragged down the stage and through the center aisle, her designer gown dragging along the carpet as 400 guests parted like the Red Sea, staring at her with utter contempt while camera shutters clicked continuously. The aftermath was swift and uncompromising. The Founders Gala was formally brought to an orderly close within 20 minutes. Mr. Arthur Vance and I held a brief, 15-minute executive press briefing in the private lounge, confirming that all embezzled funds had been frozen in escrow and that the Sanders Group remained financially robust under my sole transition into the chairmanship. Back at the Sanders Manor that night, the house was quieter than a tomb. My mother sat on the living room sofa, weeping softly with her face buried in her hands. She was crushed, not just by Chloe's deception, but by the guilt of how easily she had dismissed my warnings and scolded me in favor of a criminal. My father stood by the fireplace, staring into the dying embers. When I entered, he turned around, his eyes red-rimmed. "Molly," my father said, his voice thick with shame. "I failed as the head of this family. I wanted so badly for William to feel entirely equal that I closed my eyes to the danger she brought into our home. I allowed her to disrespect you. And, Mrs. Wilson, can you forgive an old man's foolishness?" I walked over, resting a hand gently on his shoulder. "You loved your son, Dad. That wasn't a crime. The mistake was assuming everyone who enters this house carries the same pure intentions." Upstairs, the door to William's room was cracked open. I walked up the carpeted hallway and stepped inside. The room was dark, save for the pale moonlight filtering through the window. William sat on the floor against the foot of his bed, his tuxedo jacket discarded, his face buried in his knees. His shoulders shook with silent, agonizing sobs. I walked over and sat down on the floor beside him, leaning my back against the bed just as we used to do when we were children hiding from thunderstorms. For a long time, neither of us said a word. "I was so stupid," William finally choked out, his voice raw and broken.
"I
"Wanted to prove that I was capable, that I was truly your equal in the family. She made me feel like I was a king, Molly. And the whole time she was just using me as a lockpick to steal your inheritance." He turned his head toward me, tears glistening on his hollow cheeks. I yelled.
at you.
"I defended her when she tried to take your room. I told you that you didn't belong here. I don't even deserve to carry the Sanders name." I looked at my brother, not the defensive, arrogant executive Chloe had manipulated, but the boy who used to help me build tree houses and study for exams. "You carry the Sanders name because Mom and Dad chose you, William," I said, firmly, my voice gentle but unyielding. "Blood didn't make you my brother. 20 years of growing up together did. Chloe targeted your deepest insecurity because she knew that as long as you were fighting me, you wouldn't look at what she was stealing behind your back." William covered his face, sobbing openly. "I almost destroyed everything." "You didn't destroy it," I said, resting my hand on his shoulder, "because I came home." 3 months later, the criminal trial for Chloe Vane concluded with a swift guilty plea. Faced with overwhelming digital, forensic, and testimonial evidence, she was sentenced to 5 years in state prison without eligibility for early parole, along with full financial restitution orders that stripped away every penny she had ever accumulated. At the Sanders Group headquarters, the branch office had undergone a thorough restructuring. William had stepped down from his executive director role voluntarily.
Instead
Of retreating from the company in shame, He requested a transfer to the ground-level operations and logistics division. He arrived at 7 every morning, wearing work boots and a plain lanyard, earning the respect of his colleagues through genuine labor rather than inherited status. He had grown quieter, sharper, and profoundly grounded. On a bright Tuesday morning in early autumn, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the chairman's office on the 40th floor. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in," I called out. Mrs. Wilson stepped inside, carrying a tray with freshly brewed Earl Grey tea and 2 porcelain cups, followed by Brian and William, who held the quarterly logistics audit report. "Quarterly branch margins are up 14%, Chairman Sanders," William said, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips as he handed me the binder. "Good work, William," I smiled, taking the file and setting it on the desk. I looked out across the sprawling city skyline below. The morning sun bathed the glass towers in gold, pure and untainted. The storms had cleared, the parasites were gone, and the foundation beneath our feet was finally unbreakable.